Today's anime review is the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA series. Once again, I have finally get to revisiting on the Egyptian arc on the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA ones, as well as the beginnings of how the series, the first OVA in 2000, how it's later adapted to the Stardust Crusaders series, and the whole meaning of the whole revisiting of how I wanted to do this as for an OVA series like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or OVA series, because that's just how it is as well. And yes, this was based on the manga of the same name by Hirohiko Araki, which is basically. Yes, this anime was produced by the anime company Another Pushpin Planning, which is known for their work on Robot Carnival. The OVA series third part has been adapted to the most infamous series, which is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders, which ironically is the 2014 anime television series of how the original JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA has been adapted. I mean, it has gotten a lot more popular and more famous in the 90s, which for anybody who are a fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure out there would know for this. So for the story plot in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, particularly there are two types of series, like series 2 as well as the series 1, in a whole bizarre way of how the using episodes all together, or like is part of the when it's adapted to the 2014 JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders television series. So for the plot in the story is that Joseph Joestar and his Japanese grandson Jotaro fight an ongoing blood feud against Dio Brando, who is an immortal vampire who caused the death of their ancestor Jonathan, using the magical powers of the Stand, which is a deck of tarot cards that bestows psychic attributes on the possessor of each card. The Joestar clan and Brando's minions face off in a violent battle that plays almost like Fist of the North Star in the process, what you see in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, but it's basically of how it's all had to come with to deal with in the whole certain thing what you see in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, as it's most surreal in a way into these days, with its warring secret elites and magical trumps. JoJo owes a considerable debt to Roger Zelensky's classic story, which is basically also known in the title as particularly as, what you guessed it, from 1972, Princess in Amber. Particularly considering the immortal tones of its hero, there are several JoJo's stretching from the 19th century to the 21st century of how the time period goes, of what you see in the original JoJo's Bizarre Adventure story goes, as it was to the original manga, especially in the Stardust Crusaders arc. If you ever read the original manga, or if you watch the OVA, or most of all the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure TV series, like either the 2012 series or Stardust Crusaders television series, what I do as how it goes, which is the whole meaning of how it goes. But yep, you guessed it. There is a more correct translation of the title might put out atmosphere after the Bao creator Hirohiko Araki's 1987 manga and Shonen Jump begins in the 1880s, when an Aztec death mask causes trouble for all who comes into the contact with it. Archaeologist named Jonathan Joestar begins a vendetta against Dio, who tries to steal his inheritance and kills his dog when Dio eventually dons the mask and becomes a vampire, causing Jonathan's death as his family flees for the U.S. When the story jumps to New York in the 1930s, where Jonathan's descendant Joseph continues the battle through in the Second World War. Before the story, when it progresses in the 1980s, especially with Jotaro Kujo, who is Joseph Joestar's half-Japanese grandson, but in the anime version deals the primarily, which is a lot more different, especially with the 1980s incarnation, as he and Joseph fight Dio Brando while he tries to heal his terrible wounds, especially his disembodied head, who has been sewn onto the body of Jonathan Joestar, and activate his ultimate trump card, the ability to stop time, following of how this particularly how it goes. I mean, if you just watch the OVA, after you watch the 2012 JoJo's Bizarre Adventure TV series or the Stardust Crusaders TV series in general, it's basically of how just what it is, as how you want to expect of how it's adapted from by how the OVA starts with the arc which is adapted from the Stardust Crusaders arc from the original manga, especially for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, had a lot to do with as well how it goes, as what you guessed it. But that's just how it is, as how it progresses. So that's for the story. I mean, the animation, however, in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, however, it looks a lot very well done animated, especially in the 90s, particularly of how it only has runs from November 19th, 1993 until November 18th, 1994, especially each episodes, which are 34 to 37 minutes on 6 episodes, especially the original series. But the prequel series, on the other hand, is basically runs about 27 to 32 minutes from May 25th, 2000 until October 25th, 2002, which is in the early 2000s. And yeah, that was basically how it has to the extent to this is your typical OVA series, which is later adapted to the Stardust Crusaders television series, especially for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And on top of that, that's particularly how I love the fight action scenes, especially between Jotaro and Dio Brando. How you see, if you ever watch the OVA series, or if you watch JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders, which is the second television series from 2014, if you've ever been a fan of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series, from what I know, and yeah, because most of the episodes from, like, episode 1, from May 25th, 2000 until, which is, you guessed it, January 25th, 2002, which is basically adapted from the second series of the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure prequel OVAs. Some of these 7 of these episodes has been adapted as part of the story, which is to later revisited for the 2014 series, which is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders. Even though I've already looked back on reviewing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders anyway, but this is a lot more different than the 2014 series. But for episodes 8 through 13, on the other hand, it's basically started as an OVA since November 21st, 1993 until November 8th, 1994, which is the final episode, Dio's World, Farewell My Friends, especially where Jotaro has the battle against Dio Brando after he pursues through the streets of Cairo, Egypt, of how you see if you ever watch either the OVA or the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders TV series, in how it presented of how it goes. And if there is a only thing for an anime series like this, of how it goes, of how you expect, yeah, because that's how Jotaro uses the Star Platinum, particularly when he fights Dio Brando in the whole way of how, that's just how it is. And yeah, Dio Brando kills people with his fists, and the bodies and the blood all over there. And yeah, there's bloodstain in the car and such. Especially the action fight scenes of how you see in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA, as of how you expected. That all makes perfect sense of how. And yeah, there are some names that sounded familiar, what you find in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series as well, of how you expect, of how the inspiration names came, which is something considered to be the best of what Hirohiko Araki had a lot to do when he created the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure manga series, and how this whole turn of event thing of how, oh yeah, the dog Iggy, who is named after Iggy Pop which is in the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA series. But Dio Brando is originally named after the heavy metal singer Ronnie James Dio from the band Rainbow, and he was originally a singer for Black Sabbath, and until he did the Holy Diver album, which is basically the original basis name for the character Dio Brando in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which it has how the inspiration names goes as well. From the tomes of how. And there was also the Capcom computer game released in 1998, which I haven't known about until now. And yeah, there are some psychic warriors like Mariah and Midler, which are basically named after certain musical references of how, in the style of the OVA series Bastard, of how you could find any credibility of what you find in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA. Most of the episodes from the original JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA series has finally later adapted into the Stardust Crusaders TV series, I mean, when I first watched this, I was like, it's like I'm revisiting JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders, because anybody hasn't heard that the episodes from the original JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OVA series has been adapted to the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stardust Crusaders series. Yeah, because it's basically the real icing on the cake of what needs to be added for how the story from the plot from these any certain episodes from the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure series has adapted to the TV series, which is Stardust Crusaders later on in 2014, because this has gotten a lot of attention for if you're a fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, especially if you either watch the Stardust Crusaders TV series or if you read the original manga. The OVA has a lot to do for you, but the sound animation is great. The sound is great if you watch it either in Japanese or English subtitles. And overall, I find the anime enjoyment because it's basically sounds like revisiting Stardust Crusaders to me, if you want to watch this over as a rewatch. But overall, I find this OVA series a outstanding OVA series from the 90s, considerably the revisiting Stardust Crusaders to this day, because I'm going to give this OVA series a 10 out of 10. So that's going to be it for my anime review on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's my thoughts, because it's been a while since I watched this last year, because I find this OVA series to help to have seen Stardust Crusaders.